He had everything money could buy, but he had no one in his life who truly mattered. He lived in the tallest building in the city. High above the noise and the people, from his wide glass windows he could see cars moving like tiny insects and people walking like slow shadows. To him, they were all the same. Workers, shopkeepers, drivers, beggars, none of them felt important enough to notice. He believed that only powerful people deserved attention. Every morning, he woke up to silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the empty kind. His large house had shiny floors, expensive furniture, and walls filled with art he didn't understand. Servants moved quietly around him, afraid to say anything unnecessary. No one laughed in that house. No one spoke unless spoken to. He wore perfect suits and carried the air of someone who felt superior to the world. When he walked into his office, people stood straight, lowered their eyes, and spoke in careful voices. He liked it that way. Fear made him feel important. He thought kindness was weakness and emotions were a waste of time. In meetings, he didn't listen much. He spoke, and everyone else agreed. If someone made a mistake, even a small one, he made sure they felt embarrassed. He had fired people over tiny errors without thinking twice. To him, they were replaceable, like machines, but deep inside, where even he didn't like to look. Something felt missing. He ignored that feeling for years. One evening, after a long day, his driver called in sick. He didn't like relying on anyone, so he decided to drive himself. He owned many expensive cars, but that night he picked a simple black one. He didn't want attention. He just wanted quiet. He drove without a clear direction. The bright city lights slowly changed into softer, dimmer ones. Big glass buildings turned into small shops. Smooth roads turned into narrow streets filled with noise, laughter, and the smell of street food. He had never driven this far into regular neighborhoods before. Suddenly, the car stopped. He tried the engine again. Nothing. He hit the steering wheel in frustration. The car had betrayed him in a place he didn't want to be. There were no tall buildings, no expensive stores, no familiar faces, just people. He stepped out of the car, looking uncomfortable. People glanced at him, but didn't stare for long. He wasn't special here. He was just another man with a problem. He pulled out his phone. No signal. That made him even more angry. He walked a few steps and noticed a small street market. There were simple wooden stalls, colorful cloth roofs, and lantern-style lights hanging above. People were talking, laughing, buying simple things, going about their small lives. He stood there, feeling out of place. Then he noticed her. She sat behind a small table. In front of her were handmade items, bracelets, little cloth dolls, keychains, and candles. Her eyes were open, but they didn't focus on anything. She was blind. She was gently twisting thread around a small wooden frame, her fingers moving slowly and carefully. Her movements were soft, almost peaceful. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't stressed. She looked calm. He didn't know why. But his feet moved toward her stall. He stopped in front of her table. She didn't look up, but she spoke. "Good evening," she said with a warm, natural tone. "Feel free to touch anything." He was surprised. She didn't know who he was. She didn't fear him. She didn't try to impress him. He picked up bracelet without thinking. It was simple, made from small wooden beads and thread. Not the kind of thing he would ever buy. "How much is this?" he asked, trying to sound normal. She smiled slightly. "Whatever you feel it is worth." That answer caught him off guard. People always told him prices. No one trusted him. Everyone tried to take advantage of him. But here was someone who didn't even see him. Giving him the power to choose, he stood there in silence. He placed some money on the table. More than enough, and turned to leave. "Thank you," she said softly. "Whoever you are, I hope your night gets easier." Those words stayed with him. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. He walked back to his car, feeling something strange in his chest. Not anger, not pride. Something softer. He didn't like it, but he couldn't push it away either. Soon, a local mechanic helped start his car. He nodded quickly and drove away without much thought. But his mind wasn't quiet. At home that night, he sat alone in the dark. He held the bracelet in his hand. It didn't shine. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't impressive, but it felt warm. For the first time in years, he thought about a stranger's voice instead of his own success, and he didn't realize it yet. But a small change had already begun inside him. He told himself it was just curiosity. That's what he kept saying in his head, as he drove back to the same small street the next evening. He didn't dress in his usual sharp suit. He wore a simple shirt and jeans. He wanted to feel normal, even if he didn't know how. The bracelet was still in his pocket. He parked his car further away, this time, and walked slowly toward the market. From a distance, he saw the small stalls, the dim yellow lights, and the familiar crowd of laughing voices. Something about the place felt calmer than his world of glass. Buildings and cold rooms. He found her again. She was sitting in the same spot, fingers moving gently over a small piece of fabric as she stitched tiny flowers onto it. Her table was neat, everything placed carefully, like she knew exactly where each thing belonged. He stood there quietly. Not sure what to say? She tilted her head slightly. You're standing very still, she said softly. You must be the quiet type. He blinked. She smiled. People breathe differently when they're nervous. So that made him feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with money or power. Just wanted to see how you were doing, he said finally. That's kind, she replied. Most people only come when they want to buy something. He didn't answer. He only pulled out a chair and sat down in front of her stall. They talked about simple things, the weather, the small market, the sounds around them. She told him she could tell what time of day it was by the way the air changed. She could tell when children were nearby by the way their footsteps sounded lighter and faster. She could tell when someone was sad by the way they spoke, even if they tried to hide it. He had never heard anyone talk like that. He found himself listening carefully, not out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted to hear her words. She wasn't trying to impress him. She didn't ask him who he was or what he did. She didn't ask about his car or his clothes. She treated him like a regular person. Days turned into a routine. Every evening after work, he found himself driving to the same street. Sometimes he bought small items. Sometimes he just sat and talked. Sometimes he said very little, and she did most of the talking. And for the first time, he didn't feel the need to dominate the conversation. He started to enjoy the quiet visits at his office. He began noticing little things he had ignored before. The tired eyes of the workers, the slow steps of the older guard at the door, the way a young assistant held their breath when speaking to him. He didn't suddenly become kind, but he became aware. That was new. One evening, rain started falling suddenly. The market began to close quickly. People packed up their stalls, trying to protect their items. She struggled to fold the cloth covering her table, her hands moving a little faster than usual, without thinking. He stepped forward and helped her. She froze for a moment. Thank you, she said calmly. Though she looked surprised, he didn't say much. He just made sure the cloth was secured and her things were safe. That small moment stayed with him the next week. He brought her a cup of tea from a nearby stall. He didn't make it feel like a big gesture. He just placed it near her hand so you don't drop it, he said awkwardly. She laughed softly. You're learning, she said. Learning what? He asked to care, without making noise. She replied. Her words stayed with him. He started hiding his expensive watch under his sleeve. He started parking his car farther away. He didn't want her to find out about his life. Not because he was ashamed, but because he liked who he was when he sat in front of her. He felt lighter, more real. One evening, she asked gently, Does someone wait for you at home? The question caught him off guard. No, he said, not even a friend. He hesitated. No. There was a brief silence. That must feel lonely, she said softly. He didn't respond, but something inside him tightened. He wasn't used to anyone noticing that part of him. That night, he went home and sat in his dark living room again. The silence felt louder than before. Her words echoed in his mind. That must feel lonely. For the first time, he didn't push the feeling away. Instead, he let it sit there. The next evening, when he returned, she greeted him with a warm smile. "You came back," she said. "I wondered if you would." "I didn't want the day to feel empty," he replied without thinking. She didn't tease him. She didn't make a big deal of it. She just nodded. Sometimes the two of them sat quietly together, not talking, just listening to the sounds of the market. Music from a faraway radio. Soft footsteps. Voices of people walking by. He realized something that scared him and comforted him at the same time. He was starting to look forward to seeing her more than anything else in his day. He didn't know it then, but he was slowly changing. Not because someone forced him to, but because someone treated him like he was human, not powerful, not rich, just human. And that was something he had never experienced before. He never thought he would care about someone like this. Not someone he couldn't control. Not someone he couldn't impress with money, power, or status. But every day as he walked to the small street market, he felt a pull he had never known before. It was quiet when he arrived that afternoon. The sun had started to go down, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. She was sitting behind her small table, her fingers tracing the edges of a cloth doll, making sure everything was neat. She hummed a tune he had never heard before, but it made him feel calm in a way he didn't understand. He watched her for a moment. He could see the softness in her movements, the care she gave to every little thing, and he felt a strange warmth in his chest. He wanted to speak, but words seemed too heavy. Finally, she looked up slightly and said, "You're early today." "I wanted to." "See you," he said, almost whispering. She smiled gently. A smile that wasn't meant for anyone else, but somehow felt like it was meant just for him. "I'm glad you came," she said. They talked about simple things, the way they had started doing. She told him stories of her childhood, of days when she had dreams she couldn't reach, and lessons she had learned in small ways. He listened, fascinated. For years he had surrounded himself with expensive things, thinking they mattered. But he realized now that listening, really listening, could teach more than any business deal ever could. He began helping her without her noticing. Sometimes he fixed small problems she faced, a leaky roof on her stall, broken wheel on her cart, or a package that wouldn't arrive on time. He didn't tell her who he was or why he was helping. He just wanted to see her smile when things were easier. She began to notice small changes in him, too. His hands moved more gently, his voice softened, and his eyes lingered longer than they used to. She didn't question him. She didn't push him to explain. She just accepted him as he was, and that acceptance started to change him more than he wanted to admit. One rainy evening, when the sky was dark and heavy clouds pressed down, she struggled to pack up her stall. Her hands moved quickly, almost frantically. Without thinking, he rushed to help her. Holding the cloth over her goods, picking up fallen items, making sure nothing was ruined, she paused and said softly, "You didn't have to do that. I wanted to," he said. And for once, he meant it without ego, without expectation. She studied him quietly. "You're learning to care quietly," she said. "It's not easy." He didn't answer, but he felt her words echo inside him. He realized that he had never cared for anyone like this before. Not truly. He'd used people, ignored people, and sometimes even despised them. But now, he wanted to protect her, help her, and see her happy without thinking of what he would gain in return. Days passed. He found himself thinking about her when he was alone. He thought about the sound of her voice, the way she hummed, the gentle care in her hands. He wondered what it would be like if she could see him, if she knew who he was. But he didn't want her to know yet. He was afraid that everything would change if she did. Afraid that she would see him as the man he had been for years, cold, proud, and untouchable. So he kept his distance in some ways. He gave her space to talk and share, but he never revealed the truth about his life. He wanted her to like him for who he was when she spoke to him, not for what he had. One evening, she asked, "Do you ever feel lonely?" He didn't answer immediately. He wasn't used to being asked questions like that. Most people feared him or treated him with false respect, but she had no fear. She had no hidden agenda. "Yes," he admitted finally, his voice quiet. "I do." She reached out and touched his hand lightly, a gesture that surprised him. "Then it's good you come here," she said. "Sometimes loneliness is softer when you sit with someone who listens." Her words cut deeper than he expected. He realized he had spent years building walls, walls that kept everyone out, walls that kept himself lonely. And now, for the first time, someone was letting him feel warmth without judgment. He started noticing the little things about her life. How she arranged her dolls, how she folded the fabrics, how she remembered the details of everyone she met. She had no wealth, no powerful position, no fame. And yet she had a richness he had never experienced, a richness of heart, care, of perspective. He began bringing small gifts for her, but they were always simple. A cup of tea, a clean cloth, a tiny handmade brush, things he knew would help her in small ways. He never showed off his money or status. He wanted her to see only what she needed, not what he had. Sometimes they sat in silence together. The world moved around them, but they created a small space where time felt different. He didn't need his office. He didn't need his power. He didn't need approval or fear from anyone. He only needed those quiet moments with her, listening to her stories, watching her hands, hearing her laughter, and slowly he started to change. He began to smile without thinking about appearances. He laughed quietly at her jokes, even when they were simple. He began noticing things in his life he had ignored, the laughter of his workers, the small acts of kindness by strangers, the beauty in ordinary moments, but he still held back part of himself. He didn't tell her his real name, the truth about his life, or the empire he controlled. He feared that if she knew, everything would break, that the simplicity she loved about him would disappear, and she would see him as just another rich man, someone she should fear or distrust. Still, every evening, he returned. He didn't know why. He only knew that something inside him had awakened, something soft and tender that he had never allowed to grow. One night, the market was quieter than usual. A few stalls had closed early, and the streets smelled of wet earth and distant rain. She sat behind her table, humming softly. "You've been coming here a lot," she said. "Do you like it?" "I like being here," he said, unsure if that was enough. She smiled gently. "I can tell. But you don't say much about yourself." He paused. How could he explain a life built on walls, fear, and pride? How could he tell someone who had never seen the darkness in the world what it felt like to live above it all, yet be so empty inside? So he stayed quiet, but she didn't push. She simply nodded and continued her work. And in that quiet understanding, he felt a connection deeper than any he had ever known. That night, he walked home slowly. He didn't think about deals or profits or power. He thought about the sound of her voice, the way her fingers moved over the cloth, the warmth of her smile. And he realized something terrifying and wonderful: he had begun to care. He didn't know if he loved her yet. He didn't know what the future held. But he knew that his heart, the part he had ignored for years, had begun to beat differently. It had begun to feel, and that feeling was both frightening and exciting. For the first time, he didn't want to be alone, and for the first time, he didn't want to control everything. He wanted to be part of her world, even if it was small, even if it was simple. Because in her presence, he had discovered something money could never buy. Something real, something human, and he knew, deep down, that his life would never be the same again. He had never imagined that a simple street market could hold so much of his attention. Each evening, he returned, drawn by the sound of her voice and the calm way she moved. But the closer he felt, the more fragile the connection seemed to become. It began with small misunderstandings. One afternoon, she asked him about the way he dressed. He had chosen plain clothes, but she noticed the quality, the subtle elegance in the fabric. "Your shirt is nice," she said softly. He laughed nervously. "It's nothing special." But her voice held a question he could not answer. How much should he tell? How much could she understand? He worried that if she discovered the truth, she might not see him the same way. Days later, an envelope arrived at her small stall. She opened it carefully. Inside was a small note with his name written neatly, explaining that he had sent a gift for her handmade crafts. She looked up at him, startled. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and concern. "I wanted to help," he said simply, but she felt something deeper. The way he helped had changed. It was no longer casual or quiet. It had weight, intention, and something she could not see, but could feel. She realized he cared in a way that was unusual for anyone she had met. Still, she didn't know who he really was, and when she found out, she would be shocked. The revelation came unexpectedly. One evening, as he tried to help her arrange her display, a passerby recognized him and spoke loudly enough for her to hear. "Isn't that the owner of the skyscrapers downtown?" the person asked. She paused. Her hands froze on the table. She felt a small shock. A sudden pause in her heartbeat. He saw the change in her posture and immediately stepped back. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes wide, though she could not see him. "Then, tell me," she said, and for the first time he did. He told her who he was. He explained the empire, the wealth, the power. He told her about the offices, the employees, and the deals. He told her everything, hoping she would understand, but she didn't respond immediately. She needed time to process. He had feared this moment, yet it had arrived faster than he expected. "I thought I knew you," she said finally, her voice steady but carrying a note of sadness. "I liked the person who came here quietly, without needing anything, without showing off." He felt a sharp ache in his chest. He had wanted her to know the real him, but now he realized that what she valued was not his power, but the person he had been while she was with him. "I am that person," he said earnestly. "I haven't changed who I am here. I only want to be with you honestly, without pride or fear." She was silent for a long moment. The rain outside had started softly, pattering against the small cloth roof of her stall. She listened to the sound, to the world around them, and to the words he had spoken. "People change," she said finally. "But it's not easy to see the truth when someone has so much to hide." He nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had hidden behind walls for years, behind money and fear. Now those walls had begun to crumble. "I don't want to lose you," he said quietly. "I don't want to be the man you don't trust. I want to be the man you believed in when you spoke to me, before you knew anything else." Her fingers brushed over the table, restless. She struggled to trust, to believe that someone so different from her life could truly care. The gap between their worlds seemed enormous. Yet she could feel his sincerity. She could feel the change in him. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to see if this is real. Time to see if you are really the person you pretend to be here." He felt a pang of fear. Losing her now, after feeling the first warmth of connection, seemed unbearable. But he understood. Trust was built slowly, not demanded. He stepped back and nodded. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I will wait. I will prove it." Days passed and he returned every evening. He didn't bring gifts. He didn't speak too much. He simply sat near her stall, helping in small ways, watching her work, and listening when she spoke. He let her see the real him slowly, without pressure, without grand gestures. She began to notice the little differences in him again. The gentleness in the way he handled her things, the patience he showed when the rain soaked the streets, the quiet attention he gave to her words, as if they were the most important in the world. Her heart, which had tightened with doubt, began to soften. She realized that despite his wealth, despite his status, he was learning the ways of a simple life. He was learning to care for someone without expecting anything in return. He was learning humility. One evening, as they sat in the quiet market, she asked softly, "Why do you stay?" He looked at her and smiled faintly. "Because I feel more alive here than anywhere else," he said honestly. "Because with you, I am more myself than I have ever been." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "I am scared," she said. "I don't want to get hurt." He reached out carefully, resting his hand near hers on the table. "I am scared too," he said. "But I would rather feel this fear with you than live without it." The rain stopped, leaving the streets wet and shiny. The lights reflected softly on the puddles, and the market felt peaceful, almost magical. In that moment, the distance between their worlds seemed smaller, though still present. They were different, yes. He had wealth she had never touched, power she had never known. But in the quiet of shared moments, none of that mattered. She began to trust him slowly, learning to see the person beneath the riches and titles. He began to understand the value of honesty, patience, and vulnerability. They both realized that love, when built carefully, was stronger than fear, status, or pride. But the road ahead was still uncertain. She worried about the world beyond the market. She worried that his old life could pull him back, that his power could overshadow the connection they were building. And he worried too about losing her trust, about making mistakes, about proving that his feelings were real. Every evening, as they parted, he walked home quietly, reflecting on their moments together. He thought about her patience, her courage, and the simple strength she carried despite her blindness. He realized that he had fallen not for her appearance or her situation, but for the way she made him feel alive, honest and human. And she, in her own way, began to realize that despite the wealth and power he held, he had chosen to be gentle, kind, and real when it mattered most. She began to believe cautiously that love could grow even between two very different worlds. But deep down, they both knew the next steps would be the hardest. Trust, honesty, and courage would be needed if they wanted to continue. And both were willing, quietly, to face the fear of pain, uncertainty that came with it. Because sometimes love required not just feeling, but proving. Not just wanting, but choosing in both of them. In their separate ways, had begun to understand what it truly meant to care for someone beyond fear. Beyond pride, and beyond all else, time moved slowly, but steadily, in the small street market. The rich man and the blind woman continued to meet each evening, learning more about each other with every conversation. The air between them was softer now, filled with trust, care, and quiet understanding. Yet both of them knew the journey was far from over. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a deep orange, she looked at him carefully. "I want to know everything," she said. "Not just what I see here. I want to understand you truly." He hesitated. For years he had built walls around himself, hiding his fears, his mistakes, and even his feelings. But now, with her patience and quiet presence, he felt he could let them down. "Then I will tell you," he said softly. He spoke of his past, of the life he had lived before she had entered it. He spoke of the loneliness he had ignored, the mistakes he had made, the people he had hurt. He didn't try to excuse anything. He simply spoke the truth. She listened. She asked questions, gently and without judgment, and he answered honestly. Sometimes her voice trembled when she realized the depth of the isolation he had faced, yet he could feel no blame in her words, only understanding. For the first time, he realized that being vulnerable did not make him weak. With her, it made him real. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, the distance between their worlds shrank. She trusted him more, and he began to live differently, not just in the market, but everywhere else in his life. He treated his employees with respect. He began to listen instead of commanding. He started noticing the people who had always been invisible to him, offering help and attention without expecting anything in return. One evening, she asked him to walk with her beyond the market. Along the wet streets that reflected the lights of the city, they moved slowly, his hand guiding lightly near hers, careful not to startle her. "Do you feel different?" she asked, her voice curious. "Yes," he said quietly. "I feel alive. I feel like I am living for the first time in years." She smiled softly. "And do you feel the fear?" "Yes," he admitted. "But it doesn't hurt the way it used to. I'm afraid of losing you, not because of who you are, but because of what you mean to me." That evening, something shifted in their connection. He realized that love was not about showing off wealth or power. It was not about being admired or feared. It was about presence, honesty, and care. And she, in her calm and gentle way, had shown him what it meant to be human. But the world outside the market still existed, and he knew that to truly be with her, He would have to take a step beyond quiet visits, beyond small gestures. He would have to trust himself to love fully, without hiding, without fear. One rainy night, after helping her cover her stall, he took a deep breath. "I want you to know something," he said softly. "I cannot promise that I am perfect. I cannot promise that I will never make mistakes. But I can promise you this. I will always try. I will always care. I will always be honest with you." Her fingers brushed his hand, tentative, but sure. "That is all I need," she said. "All I ever wanted was honesty. All I ever wanted was to be seen." In that moment, he realized something he had never understood before. She had never needed his money. She had never needed his power. She had needed him to be real, to be present, to care without pretension. And now he could give her that fully. The days that followed were different. He no longer came simply as a visitor to her stall. He came as a part of her life, slowly, carefully, learning to share without overwhelming. They laughed together more than ever. They spoke of dreams, hopes, and fears. And even in silence, they felt connected in a way that words could not capture. But the greatest change was inside him. The rich man who had ignored everyone, who had treated life as a game of control, now felt something stronger than money or fear. He felt love. Real love, built on patience, trust, and human connection. One afternoon, as she arranged her crafts, she paused. "I never thought I could trust someone like you," she said. He knelt slightly to meet her hand. "And I never thought I could feel something like this," he said. "You've taught me more about life than anything else ever has. You've taught me to see, to listen, to care. And I will never forget that." Her fingers rested lightly on his. "Then we are learning together," she said, "and that is enough." Time moved on, and the rich man began to leave parts of his old life behind. Not everything. He could not abandon responsibility, but he no longer measured life by wealth or power alone. Instead, he measured life by moments like these, moments of truth and care. They faced challenges, of course. People in the world outside the market did not understand their connection. There were whispers, questions, and doubts. But the rich man and the blind woman learned to face those doubts together. Their bond was stronger than fear, stronger than judgment, stronger than appearances. And in the quiet evenings under the soft lights of the market, they discovered something extraordinary, love that was built not on sight or wealth, but on trust, respect, and the willingness to truly see each other. One day, he gave her a small gift. Not something expensive, not something flashy, just a simple handmade bracelet, carefully crafted like the one she made herself. "I want you to have this," he said. "Not because it has value, but because it reminds me of how much you've changed my life." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "And you have changed mine," she said. "Not because of what you have, but because of who you are here with me." From that day on, their bond grew deeper. He learned to love without arrogance. She learned to trust beyond fear. They faced the world together, each step a choice to continue believing in each other, to continue caring despite everything that tried to separate them, and finally, the rich man understood something he had never realized before. The blind woman had not needed him to see her life. She had needed him to see her heart. And in doing so, he had learned to see his own. Years later, when people spoke of him, they no longer spoke of wealth or fear. They spoke of change, of a man who had discovered what it meant to love and to be loved, a man who had learned that power meant nothing without kindness. And that true sight came from the heart. And in the quiet corners of the market, with the hum of life around them, the rich man who once ignored everyone now laughed, listened, and lived fully because he had found someone who saw him in a way no one ever had. And she, the blind woman, smiled because for the first time, someone had truly seen her. Not just her blindness, not just her life, but her soul. Together they had discovered the greatest wealth of all, the wealth of love, trust, and human connection. And that wealth could never be taken away. Time had a quiet rhythm now. The rich man no longer felt the constant rush of his old life. The skyscrapers, the meetings, the endless decisions, they existed, but they no longer defined him. He had found something far more valuable, something he never expected to find in a small market on a quiet street: connection, trust, and love that went beyond appearances. Every evening, he walked the familiar path to the market, his footsteps echoing softly on the wet pavement. He no longer hurried. He allowed himself to notice the people around him, the laughter of children playing in the street, the scent of fresh bread from a small bakery, the chatter of neighbors sharing their daily stories. Life had a richness he had never taken the time to feel before. She was there, as always, sitting behind her small table. Her fingers moved gracefully over the fabric and thread, arranging her handmade items carefully. Her voice carried through the air, soft and melodic, as she greeted people passing by. But when he arrived, she looked up with a smile that made the world feel brighter. "You came," she said simply. "I did," he replied. "I wouldn't miss it." The way she said it, the simple honesty in her words, reminded him why he had changed. She didn't care about his wealth or his name. She cared about him, the person he was when the walls of his old life were set aside. They spent the evening as they often did, talking about the small things: the weather, the new items in her stall, the people in the neighborhood. But even in the ordinary, there was magic. He realized that he could share his thoughts without fear, that he could be himself without the need to impress. And she listened. She always listened. One evening, he decided it was time to take another step. He had waited, observed, learned, and changed. But he knew that if he truly wanted to be a part of her life, he had to share more than words. "I want to show you something," he said gently. She tilted her head. "What is it?" "It's nothing fancy," he said with a small smile. "But it's something I made for you." From his coat pocket, he carefully pulled out a small box. She reached out and took it, her fingers brushing against his. The box was simple, wrapped in plain paper, but inside was a tiny book. A book filled with sketches, small notes, and little messages he had written over the weeks. They were observations of her world, things he had noticed, moments he had shared quietly. Her fingers traced the edges of the pages, reading softly. "You noticed all this?" she whispered. "I did," he said. "Every small thing. Because you matter. Because this you has changed my life." Her voice trembled slightly, and he realized that his words, the simplicity of them, had touched something deep inside her. "I don't know what to say," she said finally. "This means so much," he smiled, feeling warmth in his chest. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that it's true. Everything in here is true." From that evening, their bond grew stronger. He no longer saw her as someone he needed to impress or protect. He saw her as an equal, someone whose strength and courage inspired him every day. And she, in turn, began to trust not only his words, but his actions. The consistency of his care, the honesty in his presence. Life outside the market still demanded his attention, of course. There were business matters, responsibilities, and people who expected the old version of him, the man who controlled everything and everyone. But he handled them differently now. He listened. He trusted others. He made decisions not just for profit, but for fairness and compassion. It wasn't always easy. Old habits were hard to break, and sometimes the pressure of his former life threatened to pull him back. But whenever he felt the weight of the world pressing down, he thought of her. He thought of the calm in her voice, the patience in her hands, and the warmth in her smile. It reminded him why he had changed, and it gave him strength to continue being better. One evening, as they walked together after closing the stall, she spoke quietly. "Do you ever regret anything?" He paused, considering her question. "Regret?" he repeated. "I don't think so. I regret the years I spent alone, ignoring life. But I wouldn't trade those years for this, because without them, I wouldn't have understood what really matters." She smiled softly. "You've grown a lot. I can see it in everything you do. Even in the way you walk beside me, listening instead of leading." He chuckled lightly. "I've had a good teacher, and I've had a student," she replied playfully. They laughed together. the sound blending with the evening breeze and the soft hum of the city. It was a laugh free of fear, free of pretense. It was a laugh that belonged to them alone, born from trust, care, and shared understanding. Days turned into months, and their lives intertwined more deeply. He helped her improve her small business, but not in a way that overshadowed her efforts. He guided her gently, offering advice and support, but always letting her make the decisions. She learned new skills, expanded her reach, and felt empowered in ways she had never imagined. And he learned too. He learned patience, humility, and the true value of kindness. He discovered that wealth was meaningless without love, and that power was hollow without connection. She had shown him that life was richest when shared, that happiness was found in small, honest moments, not in grand gestures or material things. One night, as they sat quietly together, he spoke softly. "I used to believe that I could be happy alone with everything I wanted, but now I see that happiness isn't about what you have. It's about who you are with and how you live. You've taught me that." She placed her hand lightly over his. "And you've taught me to trust, to hope, and to see beyond fear." "We've changed each other," he nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. "Yes," he said, "and I hope we can keep growing together. Not just as friends, but as something more." She smiled, a gentle, quiet smile. "I've already felt that. Every day. Every moment we share." Streets around them were quiet now. The market had closed, and the city lights reflected softly on the wet pavement. In the stillness, they felt the strength of their bond, the quiet certainty that they had found something rare and precious, a love built on trust, patience, and honesty. They walked slowly, hand in hand, knowing that life would continue to challenge them. But they also knew that together they could face anything. And in that moment, the rich man who had once ignored everyone felt complete. Not because of money, power, or fear, but because he had found someone who truly saw him, who believed in him, and who loved him not for what he had, but for who he had become. The blind woman, in turn, felt safe and seen in a way she had never imagined. She realized that sight was not the most important thing in love. What mattered was the heart, the trust, and the willingness to grow together. They discovered a life richer than any fortune, a connection stronger than any empire, and a love deeper than any words could describe. And for the first time in his life, the man understood what it truly meant to live, to care, and to love. He had been blind in many ways before, blind to kindness, blind to connection, blind to the true wealth of life. But she had shown him the way, and in turn, he had shown her that even the richest hearts could learn to see with love, patience, and honesty. From that day forward, they walked through life together, side by side, hearts open, learning, growing, and loving. They faced challenges, yes, but nothing could shake the foundation they had built. Nothing could take away the lessons they had learned or the bond they had created. And in the quiet moments, when the world seemed far away, they simply held each other's hands, smiled, and knew that they had found something that would last forever. A love born not of wealth, not of sight, but of the courage to see and be seen. Life had changed in ways the rich man had never imagined. The streets he once passed by without a thought now felt alive with stories, voices, and small moments of beauty. He no longer measured time by meetings, profits, or deadlines. He measured it by moments spent with her, by laughter shared, by the simple joy of being present in someone else's life. The blind woman had grown used to his presence. Though she still marveled at how much he had changed, he was no longer distant or cold. He listened without judgment, helped without showing off, and cared without expecting anything in return. And yet, she could sense that beneath his calm exterior, he carried the weight of a past life, a life filled with power, decisions, and a loneliness that had taken years to understand. One morning, as the sun filtered through the thin curtains of her small room above the stall, she asked softly, "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" he asked, sensing the depth of her question. "This life you had before. The wealth, the control, the attention. Do you ever long for it?" he thought carefully. Sometimes, he admitted, but then I remember what it cost me. And I realize that nothing I had then compares to what I have now. This life, these moments, you. Her fingers traced the edge of her cup as she smiled softly. I'm glad you see it that way, she said. Because this, us, it's real, and real matters more than everything else. Days passed with quiet routines. He helped her organize her stall in the mornings, walked with her through the streets, and sometimes carried small baskets of goods to save her strength. She taught him to notice the little things, the rhythm of the market, the voices of people, the way a child's laugh could light up a corner of the world. And he in turn taught her patience in handling new tasks, and the confidence to dream bigger than she ever had before. But life had its challenges. One afternoon, a group of men arrived at the market, curious about the relationship between the wealthy man and the blind woman. Their questions were sharp, their voices laced with doubt and suspicion. Why would a man like you care for someone like her? One of them asked. He didn't answer immediately. He could feel the tension rising, but he kept calm. He looked at her, and she gave him a small nod, reminding him to stay grounded. Because she is worth more than anything money can buy, he said finally. Because she sees me for who I am, not what I am. And that matters more than everything else. The men were silent, perhaps surprised, perhaps unsure what to say. And then they left, leaving the market quiet again. She reached for his hand and he held it gently. Thank you, she whispered. No, he said softly. Thank you for reminding me what matters. Even in these moments of challenge, their bond grew stronger. They learned to face the world together, to trust in each other's words, and to protect the small happiness they had created. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank after the market closed, the air was filled with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. She paused, listening to the gentle lapping of water against the stone edge. Do you ever think about the future? She asked. All the time, he replied. But the future feels different now. Before, it was about power and wealth. Now, it's about us, about what we can build together. She smiled softly. And what do you see? I see a life where we care for each other, where we grow together, and where we continue to learn from each other, he said. I see a life where fear doesn't control us, where honesty and love guide our choices. Her hand brushed against his. Then I see the same thing, she said. I see a life worth living. In the following weeks, they continued to strengthen their bond. He began introducing small changes in his old life to reflect what he had learned. Meetings were shorter, decisions were made with fairness, and employees noticed a gentler side of him that they had never seen before. He no longer sought control for its own sake. Instead, he sought understanding, compassion, connection, not just with her, but with everyone around him. She noticed the changes too, not just in him, but in how people treated them together. The market, once full of whispers and curiosity, began to feel welcoming. Vendors smiled when they saw the two of them together. Children laughed as they walked past, sensing the warmth between them. And strangers often remarked on the calm, almost magical presence they shared. One rainy evening, as they sat together under a small awning, she spoke quietly. Do you think love always feels this way? He considered her words. I don't know, he said finally. But I do know that love is built on trust, patience, and seeing the real person beneath everything else. And that's what we have. She smiled softly. Then I feel lucky, she said. Because this us, it's real, he nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. I feel lucky too. Every day. Every moment. They spent the night talking about dreams, hopes, and fears. They laughed, shared stories, and sometimes sat in silence, feeling the presence of each other without needing words. And in that silence, there was understanding, comfort, and a quiet joy that neither of them had known before. The rich man had learned that love was not about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about showing up, listening, caring, and being present. And the blind woman had learned that trust and patience could reveal the true character of someone's heart. Together, they had created a world where love was more important than wealth, more powerful than fear, and more enduring than any challenge. One day, he took her to a small garden nearby. The flowers were blooming, the air was fresh, and the world felt peaceful. He handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers, not the expensive kind he could have bought anywhere, but ones that were simple, vibrant, and full of life. "For you," he said softly, "because you've brought life into mine." She accepted them, her fingers brushing his. "And you've brought courage into mine," she replied. They sat together, watching the sun set over the horizon. The sky turned shades of pink, orange, and gold, and the world seemed quiet and still. In that moment, they realized that life had changed completely, not because of what they had, but because of what they had discovered in each other. Weeks turned into months, and their bond continued to deepen. They faced challenges, as all couples do, but they faced them with patience, honesty, a shared commitment to care for each other. He learned to let go of pride, and she learned to trust without fear. Together, they built a life filled with simple joys, quiet laughter, and the kind of love that could withstand anything. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the market, she paused and looked at him. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" "All the time," he said. "I used to think life was about money and power. Now I know it's about moments like this, moments we share, and the love we build together." She smiled softly. "Then we've learned the most important lesson," she said. "That love isn't about what you see or what you have. It's about who you are with and how you make each other feel." He nodded, feeling warmth in his chest. "Yes, and I couldn't have learned it without you." As the night fell and the market lights glowed softly, they continued walking side by side. The world around them seemed smaller, quieter, and safer. And in that quiet, they found a life richer than any fortune, deeper than any ambition, and more meaningful than any success, because they had found something that could not be measured in money, power, or status. They had found each other, and that, they realized, was the greatest treasure of all.